Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 2, Episode 13. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
So, Stephen, I talk about in my keynote presentations about 5 key technological forces that are driving change in retail. They're not discrete, they kind of intersect. But the most important one of these, I think, is artificial intelligence. Are you getting a sense for how powerful that could be? And can it be a differentiating element? I mean, and even can we define it more? And are we seeing it? And where do you think it fits in retail? And do you think it's going to be important?
Oh, I think it's going to be important. I think, well, one thing I've heard, and I would say this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I hear from some folks that are working in artificial intelligence that a lot of companies claim they do artificial intelligence. That it really isn't. It's kind of advanced statistical stuff. So I'll leave that to the technologists to parse out. But I think the ability for artificial intelligence, machine learning to routinize tasks to save money, but I think the more powerful thing is the predictive power to do more personalization and dynamic, site adjustments and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I think we're in the early days, but I think it's absolutely going to be.
I mean, there's lots of use cases I've heard. I mean, anything from pre-screening in a call center, which can be kind of clunky, but every now and then, I guess it's using artificial intelligence. I've seen it in merchandise planning. I think there's great potential in that.
Yep, absolutely.
I've seen it in LP. That is not talked about that much, but you've got all these cameras, and how do you detect a pattern that's different than other patterns? I was speaking with a retailer, and he said, these cameras detect sudden changes in movement and flow. And sometimes they don't mean anything, but it could mean 10 people just rushed into the store to steal from you. And, you need that processing horsepower to alert you in real time that something's different, like that machine vision meets AI. So this episode actually isn't about AI per se, but it's about the enabler of AI, cloud computing, because a lot of folks, retailers say, listen, we couldn't do we can't even imagine doing what we could do with AI without way more horsepower than we could ever really afford or would make sense. So we're going to the source on this episode, the company that started it all as a solution for their own computing problems, Amazon.
Yeah, I've heard of these guys. They seem to be pretty successful. Well, it's really fun to be talking about Amazon Web Services, not only to kind of get into the details, which we will, but I think a lot of times we've talked about Amazon. We've talked about this idea that Amazon retail doesn't make any money, that all the money is made in Amazon Web Services, which isn't so much true anymore. But certainly AWS has been a huge enabler for Amazon's overall growth and continues to grow at crazy rates and have dramatic impact. So we're going to get to hear a lot more about Amazon Web Services because we've got Tom Litchford, who's the head of worldwide retail at Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS. And Tom is a long-term retail and technology veteran, and he'll tell us all about their incredible cloud-based computing platform, how it all came to be, what their capabilities and scale look like, but also address the elephant in the room. Is AWS the right partner for retailers? So let's bring on Tom.
Tom, welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Great, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. It's a real treat. Listen, big world, such great innovation. Really excited for this interview. So why don't we start at the beginning? Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about AWS retail, and what's your background. So let's start there.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, great. So real quick, so I'm the global lead here for retail at AWS now, and been here, I'm on my 4th year, but I'm a 40-year plus retail guy. I kind of grew up in retail. In fact, if for those old timers around, if they even remember Moss Brothers and some of those old Federated brands, kind of got my feet wet there as a stock boy back when I was in college. And and then tied that to computers, and just fell in love with computer science, and of course retail gets in your blood, and now here I am 40 plus years later. But yeah, so from that aspect, again, lots of things, mostly on the vendor side. Started with NCR, did a stint at Microsoft, was the VP for retail technologies at NRF in my last job, and then moved over here to AWS to help them build out their retail industry.
Well, we've kind of, it's funny. You're one of the brands that have successfully climbed the mountain, AWS. But what is for the odd person might not actually know, what does AWS stand for?
Yeah, so great. It's Amazon Web Services, and it was the pioneer of cloud services. I'm going to get it wrong here, Michael, but what is it, about 13, 14 years ago? When Andy Jassy, working for Amazon Retail, did some infrastructure work for them, and saw the vision that this is something that would help any business, not just retailers, and similar to the way Amazon works, wrote what we call a narrative or a 6-pager for the business, got approved by the leadership team, and he goes as CEO of AWS, which is now, as you know, the leading cloud provider in this space.
And is it the case? Is this true that really Amazon built it because they couldn't find anything to take care of all that horsepower that they needed? So that it was conceived to help initially the horsepower that Amazon was needed as a retailer, but then conceived of, as you said, as a whole other product. Is that story accurate? Is that how it kind of broadly evolved?
Yeah, I think that's pretty close. I mean, in fact, if you're familiar with what we're doing in retail, we don't shy away from that heritage. We think it's our differentiator, and our tagline is actually born from retail, built for retailers. So, one of Amazon's the kind of the culture and the way we work here is you'll hear us working backwards in the customer obsession, and 90% of what AWS services are out there today were done at a customer request of course, one of those very large demanding customers being Amazon Retail.
Right. And so I think in some ways the reason to move to the cloud at this point in 2021 is fairly straightforward. You might want to touch on that, but what would make retailers hesitate about moving into the cloud, like moving taking advantage of all that processing power? What kind of objections would you run into just in general about cloud-based computing?
Yeah, no, honestly, Michael, I don't see, in my 40 years, retailers pretty much have been the laggards in adopting new technologies, whether, that's they wanted to wait to see proof that they worked, or maybe some of this kind of risk averse type mentality that we've had in the past. But, to be honest, I don't know that there's very many retailers out there today that aren't moving into the cloud. So I don't know that there's any more hesitancy other than, starting to get their feet wet, or where do we start? How do we get started? I get that question a lot. And you know what? I would argue on that one, the easiest place to get started is just to get your feet wet and start in, the classic DevOps. But, I've changed the term DevOps now to be more get into this culture of experimentation. So, if you recall in the past, it might take us 12 months to, have a great idea. And by the time, we procured hardware and software and got our act together, 12 months later, we're testing it. Well, the beauty of the cloud is you can have services up and running in, an hour, and start testing to see if your ideas work. And your associates have some of the best ideas in the world about how to take care of your customers. So why aren't you trying those and testing them to see if they work? And the cloud's a beautiful place to maybe get your feet wet there. And then e-commerce is the classic, low-hanging fruit that I see where, most retailers, as they start getting their feet wet and get comfortable with these technologies, then e-commerce is usually the first app to be what we call lifted and shifted into the cloud. And the reason there is for something called auto-scaling, right? So again, back to, my learnings in my 40 years, I don't think I could reference a retailer that did a good job of provisioning an e-commerce system to where that iron isn't sitting there idle for 9 months of the year and then overtaxed when the holidays came around. So, the beauty of the cloud there is it auto scales. So it puts resources in to the app as it's needed for the holidays. And then as that demand ramps back down, it brings those resources down so you're not sitting there idle. And by the way, you're only paying for the time the services are running. So again, you're not paying for idle iron sitting there.
So, Tom, I imagine that with all the benefits of going on AWS, you must get some pushback or at least concern from retailers that by going with AWS, they are in essence supporting a competitor. Does that come up a lot? And if so, how do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and we do get it a lot. I mean, there's a few vocal, particularly U.S. retailers that like to put that FUD out in the marketplace. And to be honest, I mean, just right up front, I work with thousands of retailers around the world today in terms of using AWS services to innovate and move their businesses forward. And at the same time, you just look at reports like from Gartner that show that we are the preferred cloud provider out there in the retail industry. So, I think really when it comes back to having that conversation, with our customers and our prospects, to me, if you were breaking it into three areas, the most important thing by far is not to be focused on your competition or what the competitive dynamics are, but to listen carefully to what your customers are saying matters. And then, if you were doing that, number two was you want the ability to unleash your builders to build that, and you want to be able to do that really, really fast. And then the final thing is you want to constantly be iterating and experimenting, and AWS cloud services make that happen. And if you were focused on those three things instead of the competitive dynamics, that would give you more of a chance of building the lasting business and have a chance to sustain yourself. And then I would argue, there's no better platform than AWS out there today that gives builders the ability to evolve that customer experiment or customer experience.
So you've touched now a few times on this flexibility, culture of experimentation, I guess more broadly being agile. Curious, and maybe this is a broader question around the impact of COVID, but I'm wondering what you've seen change in terms of what retailers are looking for by virtue of COVID. And maybe you could also touch on what you think is likely to persist as we hopefully get back to some semblance of business a little bit more as usual.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and hopefully we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here, right? And we won't hopefully maybe be talking too much about COVID anymore. But you know what? Ironically, even though, I mean, obviously retail got hit pretty hard depending on, what segment you were in, whether it was grocery or fashion or whatever. And, the irony there or what surprised me is I didn't see a slowdown. If you look across three key areas, this accelerated move to the cloud, so moving more systems into the cloud. And the reason I think you saw retailers double down on that is because of the cost savings alone. So again, that's kind of the knee-jerk reaction anyway when something, a crisis happens in retail, is to cut cost, right? Well, the cloud is beautiful there because, you're seeing anywhere from 30 to 50% cost savings. And then on top of that, as they start taking these monolithic systems and decomposing them into, more modern architectures, based on, microservices and purpose-built databases, and then running them in what we call a serverless environment, we see another 30 to 50% cost savings. So that whole acceleration into the cloud, I didn't really see much of a slowdown. Second was investment in digital transformation. I think you saw a lot of retailers get caught, kind of without the capability to do, things like buy online, pick up in store, or pick up at curb, and they were rapidly trying to figure out how to do that. Well, the cloud, was able to come in and help them, get those types of services or get those types of capabilities out there quickly. And again, this kind of even goes back to, my first comments around, working with AWS. I mean, we had already pioneered buy online, pick up at curb at the Amazon Fresh stores, where literally you do nothing. You drive into the parking lot and park in a designated parking space, for pickup, and we know you're there, and we kick off an event and bring your groceries out to you. And in this case, it can be totally contactless, right? You don't even have to roll your window down; just open your trunk and have the person put them in your trunk. So that was a beauty there. So that whole idea around digital transformation, we're seeing retailers really double down on that. And the third area was the use of ML, AI/ML, which is kind of a hype term in retail today. And again, it's almost like the cloud. Our customers ask, where do I start? Where do I get the most value? What's the use case I should be focusing on? And the problem with COVID is it just accelerated. It didn't create the problem. It actually just exposed and accelerated the problem we have specifically in supply chain and grocery, right? Where you saw, basically, and I don't understand the human nature here and why, we ran out of toilet paper of all things.
Right, yeah.
But anyway, it caught grocery with an inability to do good demand forecasting. It caught them with the inability to allocate to the stores that needed the product the most. And now on the back end of that, as they started focusing on those items that were being in high demand and turned their attention away from the slow movers, well, now they're being hurt on that side of the business too, because they're out of stock of stuff they could be selling that, even though we might call it a slow mover, it still was, could be worth billions of dollars of business to the industry, right?
Sure.
And so this whole idea about, how do I start using ML to get, more insights as to what's really going on in my business, or even counterintuitive insights, to help me get better at, whether that's, on the customer side and personalization, or on the back end side with things like demand forecasting or allocation.
One of the things, just maybe stepping back a little bit, one of the things that Michael and I have gotten into, probably, I don't know, maybe about a third or a half of our podcast episodes, and I dig into in the new edition of my book, is this idea of why does it take a crisis for retailers to innovate? And I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that retailers are slow to adopt technology. And so part of me is like, well, obviously COVID was, we could call it a black swan event or whatever, it was not anticipated. It had massive impacts in a very short amount of time. So I get that retailers, needed to, obviously, in some cases for survival, but just to pursue opportunities, innovate very, very rapidly. But at the same time, it's not a new thing that e-commerce has been growing 15, 16% a year. I was working on buy online, pick up in store at Neiman Marcus, 12 years ago. The blending of channels, what I call harmonization or omni-channel. But, all these things are things that have been out there for a long time and gaining traction, yet it seemed like so many retailers were really caught kind of flat-footed. So I'm curious, not just from your AWS experience, but all your time in industry. Yeah. Number one, do you agree with that? What do you think's behind it? And is there some particular advice you might give to retailers to build that culture of experimentation and agility?
Yeah. Well, you just hit on it in your last comment there. It's all about culture. Again, I came up, and maybe in your career you can sense to this, but at least on the vendor side, I grew up in a culture where if you screwed up, you got fired, right? And I mean, we're talking about really risk-averse mentalities here versus customer-focused mentalities, right? And so if you were truly focused on, trying to, do what your customers are asking you to do, then you would totally change your culture to be more of that culture of experimentation. You want to be constantly experimenting. And in fact, I think Jeff Bezos once said, if you already know the answer to what you're doing, then it's not an experiment, and you're just doing the same old stuff, right? And Steve, even in Steve's book, he talked a little bit about that. I forget exactly the terminology it was on that one, Steve, but the 3-year mentality where, you can't be looking back, well, look, I've been doing this for 25 years, so I know how to do this, right? Yeah. You've got to, things are changing so fast, you've got to be constantly wanting to renew yourself. And if you don't have that culture, to where you're constantly experimenting, you're learning from that experiment. If things work, getting it rolled out rapidly, then you're going to get left behind. And again, I can just go on example after example I've learned just by moving here to AWS. I don't know, Michael, do you even remember something called the Fire Phone?
I do, actually.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about a failure. I mean, it's so to date, I think it's Amazon's biggest failure, although Bezos has said, you haven't seen big yet. So,
there are those rockets that every now and then don't go where they're going.
But the point is, they're out there, on the Fire Phone, whatever the write-off was, no one got fired for that, by the way. And the learnings from that was all the voice technologies. And when they got those voice technologies, guess what that became? Alexa, right? Yeah. And now you've got a huge business over there in devices with Alexa. If you were risk averse, you wouldn't be doing things like this. So, change that culture, look for where you're causing friction to your customer and go attack it. And that way, I think you'll be successful.
It's actually funny you mentioned the Fire Phone, because many times in my keynotes, when I get to the last section talking about developing a culture of experimentation, I often ask the audience, everybody take out their Fire Phone and hold it up. And, everybody's like looking at each other. But I use that point because I think Amazon is a fantastic example of a culture of experimentation. Right. And, I love to quote Seth Godin around, failure is not an option, then neither is success. So
a great example of the friction point is the Go stores. Are you familiar with the Go stores?
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. Yeah.
So, the innovation there was, the Go team or the Go business unit came to AWS and said, hey, we want to eliminate checkout lines. So again, that gets back to that comment I made earlier about, be working backwards from what it is you're trying to do. And so, we worked with them for, I forget what it was, 4, 5, 6 years. It had started before I joined here. And, they had eliminated all sorts of technologies as not being viable. As an example, RFID would not really solve the problem. And they landed on, we think computer vision is going to do this, but there was no computer vision technology per se to solve the problem. So AWS had to pioneer something called Kinesis video streams, which is the capability to simultaneously take feeds from hundreds of cameras and figure out what Michael's doing in that store, right? And they did, and then they didn't stop there. So they removed the friction. It is truly just walk out. That's what the technology is called now that we've externalized to any of our customers. So we've removed that friction from the, being having to stand in line and check out. But what we saw was we put friction at the front of the store. Now it took time to get in the store. People were queuing up and having to get their phones out and open an app and get to a 2D barcode to show to get in the store. And so we attacked that problem. And I don't know if you saw last November, a product called Amazon One was announced, which was the palm reader. So now to get in a Amazon Go store, you don't need your wallet, you don't need a phone, you need nothing but yourself. Just show your palm, it opens up the gates, lets you in, grab what you want, and you just walk out. So that's what I mean by constantly looking for where you're putting friction in that customer journey that's going to impact their experience and their view of you as a brand.
It's a great example of the technology, right? I can't imagine the amount of computing horsepower that's necessary to drive all that, 20 years ago, or even, without the cloud-based, just pure horsepower and scale. So, last question for you. Yep. And when I think about AI and ML, so, artificial intelligence, machine learning, I think of it as a predictive model, a predictive engine. And do you think that we'll get to a point, you're sitting at a particular place where you have this fantastic view of capabilities and you're hearing, you're seeing things in the market. Do you think we'll get to the place where, whether it's supply chain or whether it's to the doorstep, that you can get to this anticipatory retail horizon where, like, I don't even know I want it, but it shows up at my door and, hey, by the way, I was thinking about that. I could see a world where it gets close, right? But from your vantage point, is that a realistic point of arrival?
Yeah, I think it's the Star Trek holograph, or what was it called? That's what we want, right?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think we're getting there. We're taking steps. I think when you look at what retailers are doing today, in terms of personalization, and again, it's not like back to the what's old is new again, right? We're going back from the old neighborhood retailing, trying to get back to that one-to-one personalization and that relationship you have with your customers. And I think we're starting to get there. I mean, we're seeing things where, if not really true personalization yet, but like, for example, at a shoe store out of the UK, Foot Asylum, we were able to at least help them get better at, segmentation and targeting customers to where, they were seeing things in upwards of around, 28% uplift in campaign revenue, just using AI to do better targeting of a segment. So like, for example, I want to sell, this particular shoe to, females 25 to 35 years old. And they were seeing really strong uplift in sales just by doing, that kind of baby step. And, I think the beauty that some people are missing too is the counterintuitive learnings you get from that. And, this was with a partner called Peak out of the UK. This was all basically mostly online type stuff that we were working with them on, and we started seeing product affinities online that I guarantee you that merchandiser that's been there for 25 years using Excel still would not have seen. And we were able to coach them to say, well, why don't you start merchandising your stores based on the affinities you see on the web? And they started seeing the same uplift in their stores, right? So, again, it's not always about that direct one-on-one relationship of ML telling you to go do this, but it's kind of learning some of those counterintuitive insights behind the scenes too.
Amazing. Well, I'll tell you, Tom, there's so much that we could delve into, but this has been great. I really appreciate you joining Michael and me on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. I guess last thing is, if folks want to learn more about you, learn more about Amazon, learn more about Amazon Web Services, where should they go? Yeah,
so it's easy. Just start at aws.amazon.com/retail and or reach out to me. I'll take your call too. I'd love to talk to you.
Well, fantastic. I'll put both those things in the show notes so folks can find those. And Tom, thanks so much for joining Steve and I on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. It was just it's so interesting, just scratching the surface, as Steve said, into what you do. And thanks for joining us and the listeners.
Enjoyed being here and love to hear your voices, and look forward to maybe seeing you guys in person again here in the near future.
All right, it's time for Remarkable or Forgettable. This almost feels like the Amazon episode. There's so much to talk about. We actually skipped a week last week. We had Tom just now on the podcast. Jeff Bezos' last letter. We've got some news out of that. We've got some Palm checkout stuff. All kinds of news from Amazon. Not unusual, but there seems to be a nice cluster. What's going on? What do you think? Remarkable, forgettable?
Well, Jeff's letters are always remarkable. I think if people don't read or haven't read Jeff's annual letters, this is the final one. So they're all super worthwhile, but they're just a great summary of the past year and kind of what's ahead. So there were a few things in there that I thought were worth mentioning. I'm curious to hear yours as well. The one that really jumped out at me was this heading about his advice to create more than you consume, which I think is just kind of a great philosophy. I've used some similar kind of language myself, so that just really resonated with me. But then there's a ton of just interesting stats, and I won't go through them all. But one was 200 million Prime members. I think that's the first time they've updated that number, which is just massive. He did this calculation, which I won't even try to get into, where he tried to estimate all the customer value they've created. And just on the retail side, he talks about that 28% of Amazon customers' purchases are completed in 3 minutes or less. And when you add up all the time they save not going to a store, that's about 75 hours per year or $630 per Prime member. And then there's just a bunch of other stuff that somehow gets you to billions and billions and billions of dollars. But that's pretty fun. I guess the other one I'd call out is he talks about Amazon becoming the Earth's best employer and the Earth's safest place to work. which are pretty bold goals, and I think certainly speaks to some of the challenges that and criticisms they've been getting. What did you find remarkable in the letter?
Well, certainly the 200 million number in print was remarkable. I mean, he talked already about vaccinating the supply chain, like dedicating billions of dollars to that early in the COVID era. That's, it's a tough task right here in Ontario, Canada. They had to close one of their plants, actually, one of their big DCs, because they needed to get their arms around it. So it's tough for everybody. They employ a lot of people, and so that was interesting. The best employer was interesting. Of course, they just they won, I guess you could say, that unionization drive. So that's interesting that it's going their way. So there's always so much going on. And then they're opening up a hair salon in London, which came out of nowhere.
I will say I did not see that coming. And when I saw it, I thought, is this like an April Fool's story I somehow got to several weeks late?
It's funny, I was gonna post, but I thought I was gonna post a picture of an Amazon Basics bowl. Is that the haircut? Is it a Basics haircut? But no, apparently it's pretty slick. I don't know. It just shows you got endless resources, practically, and endless imagination. You can do some interesting stuff, right?
Yeah, it appears to be I don't think this is remarkable in the sense that this is some bold new business strategy for them. To me, this feels like yet another of their dozens and dozens of experiments. This one appears to be an attempt to see augmented reality put into place, and they've got this point and learn technology, which I'm not quite sure I understand, but I know some people think this is both a tech experiment as well as to kind of raise their credentials among the more the B2B, selling things to the professional stylist. So I don't know, interesting, probably not remarkable in the scheme of everything Amazon's got going on.
All right, well, let's move off Amazon. It's been a lot of content on Amazon in this episode. Let's talk about Walmart. And what struck me interesting, I wanted to get your remarkable or forgettable, is kind of going a little backwards on the technology in the store, the robots. Talk about that.
Yeah, they're taking out these big towers for customer pickups. I think they're taking 1,500 of them out and focusing on curbside pickup or outside the store, put it in your trunk kind of pickup. I'm not sure about this. Walmart's been putting a lot of effort into kind of digitally enabling, to use, one of my favorite phrases, the customer experience, and a ton of investment into stores. But yeah, this is a little bit curious. I guess it's responsive to what customers are telling them. But I'm not sure I love not having kind of all the service in one place.
Yeah, it feels like it's offering less choice than more. I use that kiosk. Canadian Tire has them as well. Walmart here has them. I like them because I'm going in to pick up something else that's not, or I'm doing a return. And anyway, interesting. And they also started pulling out those Bossa Nova robots that were scanning the aisles. They said that the humans were doing just a fine job. So,
and it was creepy, probably.
I thought they were cute. Little googly eyes on the top. I thought they were cute.
One man's cute is another man's creepy, apparently.
All right, Hal. Lord and Taylor returns from the dead. What's going on there?
Well, this is, I guess, a very U.S.-centric story, but Lord & Taylor, I learned, is the oldest department store in the United States. They closed up shop a couple of years ago, closed all their stores, and then this Sadia Group, I'm not sure that's the right, Sadia Group, how do you pronounce it, but they bought Lord & Taylor's assets out of bankruptcy for $12 million. And now they are relaunching as an online-only brand, and I think this is extraordinarily forgettable. I don't know. I think Lord & Taylor has been on the decline for a long, long time. I don't know what they are offering that is unique. I looked at their website, and I don't get it at this point. But I guess if you only paid $12 million for something, you don't need that much upside.
What the question is are brands ever truly dead? Maybe we'll get into that in another episode, right? Is there a point of no return at some point for some brands, right?
Right.
That'd be a good discussion. Let's talk about returns, actually, or re-commerce. Nike and recently Lululemon announcing they're going to take some stuff back, used product back, and get into that business.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people know this re-commerce, resale sector has been pretty hot for a number of years with firms like The Real and others, Poshmark, recycling product, this is Nike's first move. There, as I understand it, they're only doing like 15 stores, and it's only for sneakers. And I think in their case, which talk about what I think Lululemon's going for, but in Nike's case, I think this is a little bit to participate in some of the competition they have, like Stadium Goods, which makes a big markup and on the more unusual Nike items, more to kind of collector's edition. So this seems a little bit more mainstream, but it's an interesting pilot. So again, not at a scale to really go, wow, this is incredibly remarkable, but I think pretty interesting. And then what Lulu's doing is also taking back gently worn yoga pants and the like. And this appears to be more part of their overall push to become a more sustainable company. They've set some corporate goals, across a broad spectrum. And I think this is a piece of it. How big an opportunity it is, I'm not sure. So from that perspective, I think it's, not totally forgettable, but certainly not a major move for them.
So less a merchandising strategy and more a corporate social responsibility strategy.
Yeah,
right?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it came off to me. So anyway, we wish them luck, and of course they're talking about the resale market is bigger than fast fashion in 10 years, or at least the people who our resellers are talking about that.
Trying to raise money. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm of two minds. Is the pandemic tailwind or headwind to that? Because I don't know if I want somebody else's stuff, but there's value. I don't know. Sustainability, I do think is going to come back fast and furious. So we'll see. All right. Well, that was remarkable or forgettable. All right, Steve, take us home.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our guest interviews and insights, and new episodes will show up every week. And please take a minute to drop us that elusive 5-star rating and tell a friend in the retail industry. I'm Steve Dennis. The expanded and completely revised second edition of my best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, is now available at Amazon, Indigo, bookshop.org, or just about anywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast, and you can learn more about me on LinkedIn or on meleblanc.co. Steve, have a safe week.